Amelia Island celebrates the 10th annual Dickens on Center Christmas Market, December 12th through 15th. Experience a Victorian Christmas festival featuring holiday entertainment, festive food and drink, St. Nick and Enchanted Village holiday shopping, and more. Info at ameliaisland.com/Dickens. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
With a river named for a mass murder, we explore the lesser-known pieces of St. Augustine's past with a local father-daughter team. Then we explore some of the intriguing donations to the Jacksonville History Center archives this year, including a trove of memorabilia from WAPE. And if a new podcast lands in a forest of competing shows, does it make a sound? We ask two local experts. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or tag us on social. It's all ahead this hour.
In Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. During U.S. presidential transitions, incoming presidents are eager to start putting their policies into place, but they're usually restrained by the long-standing principle of one president at a time. As NPR's Greg Myrie reports, President-elect Trump is already declaring policies that differ from those of President Biden.
Trump took to social media and demanded the Palestinian group Hamas release Israeli hostages before he's sworn in on January 20th. If they aren't freed, Trump said there will be, quote, hell to pay. Princeton historian Julian Zelizer says this aggressive approach could produce a breakthrough or undermine efforts by President Biden.
If his doing this somehow moves unmovable leaders on issues, that would be a good thing, but we don't know if it will work out that way. He obviously could also end up subverting Biden.
Trump has also threatened tariffs on Canada and Mexico, prompting leaders of those nations to reach out and seek clarification. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
Syrian anti-government insurgents say that they have entered the central city of Hama. This is a major Syrian government stronghold. This comes after a week of intense clashes with forces loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The fighting saw the insurgents take over all of Idlib province and large parts of Aleppo province. NPR's Hadil al-Shalchi has more.
Hama has been one of the few cities in Syria that's been completely under government control since the civil war broke out in 2011. It's also a supply route used by Iran to move arms to their Lebanese ally, Hezbollah. If the rebel forces capture the city fully, it will be a major victory for them since they launched a shock offensive last week, which saw the takeover of Syria's second city, Aleppo. Violent clashes broke out on the eastern outskirts of Hama, but Syria's state-run media denied that the insurgents had completely breached the city. The offensive is being led by a jihadist group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. HTS is designated a terrorist organization by the United States and is an offshoot of al-Qaeda, even though it broke off ties with the group a few years ago. Hadil al-Shalchi, NPR News.
Authorities in Northern California say that a gunman shot and critically wounded two kindergarten students yesterday. Officials say the male gunman then shot himself to death. Butte County, California Sheriff Corey Honey says the students attended a Seventh-day Adventist church school.
We have received some information that leads us to believe that the subject responsible for this shooting targeted this school because of its affiliation with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
The sheriff says the man apparently spoke earlier to a school administrator about possibly enrolling a student at the school. But the sheriff says officials are not sure if that was a ruse. You're listening to NPR News.
And you're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. Firefighters who lost their lives in the line of duty were remembered on Wednesday on Fallen Firefighter Memorial Day. It happened at Station 1 on North Liberty Street in downtown Jacksonville. WJCT News 89.9's Dan Scanlon has the story.
Amazing Grace closed the annual ceremony at the memorial wall. Afterward, Christopher O'Shea gazed at his son Heath O'Shea's name, the 26th, to be added to that wall.
This kind of a representation of what the service that these young men present to everyone in the community is certainly something to be proud of.
Those names, Jacksonville Fire Chief Keith Powers says, are a lasting reminder of the obvious and the insidious hazards firefighters face every single day.
The fire can be there, they can get hurt in an accident, a vehicle accident, or get hit on an accident scene. There's a lot of things that these men and women face every day when they're putting their lives on the line to help keep all the rest of us safe.
The 27th name, that of Station 19 engineer Jason Woodruff, will be added to the wall next year. Woodruff died in mid-November. Dan Scanlon, WJCT News, 89.9.
The memorial wall was dedicated in 1987. Heath O'Shea's name was the first to be added since 2021. This afternoon in Jacksonville, we'll have sunny skies, mostly sunny skies, with highs getting into the lower 70s, a slight chance for rain mainly west of Highway 301, overnight lows in the mid-40s.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Luminescence Foundation, dedicated to shedding light on neurological research focused on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases and supporting land conservation initiatives, and the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, he's an author, she's a TV anchor, and they're both obsessed with Florida history. We ask them about their latest project, exploring the stories of St. Augustine. Later in the program, we find out what new treasures have been collected this year with the Jacksonville History Center. But first, it's a father-daughter project, 459 years in the making. The history of Spanish Florida is the focus of a new illustrated book, one that both children and adults can enjoy. To discuss it, we're joined by author and illustrator Dr. Warren Clark. Good morning.
Great. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. We're also joined by his daughter, local First Coast News anchor and reporter, and my former colleague, Jessica Clark. Welcome.
Good morning, Ann.
I'm so glad to have you and Pop here.
Oh, yeah, me and Dad.
Yeah, it's a great. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you. So you both tell stories of history. You do it through illustrations and cartoons. Jessica, you do it on TV. So they're very different mediums, obviously, that you're working in. But both of you are really taken with Florida history. Where does that inspiration and passion come from?
Well, it comes from Dad for me. Dad, where does it come from for you?
It came from my mother.
Oh, okay.
When we would be riding around and we would see an historical marker on the road, she would say to my father, "Oh, sweetie, turn around. Let's go see what it says." And in a deep baritone voice, he would read it off to us. And so over and over and over again, going wherever we were traveling, that we would have that time to stop and learn something about that particular spot. And I think that's where it came from for me.
Am I right in believing that your mother was a librarian at the Library of Congress?
That's right.
So I'm guessing her love of learning and possibly history was part of her vocation.
Yeah, I think so. She was there right during the Second World War. So she was very young as she was doing that. And she was always interested both in the natural world. She majored in zoology as well as in library science, but also the history of people in particular areas, just to dig it up, just to find things that were off the beaten path. She just loved that.
Now, these historical markers, Jessica, they're all over the state. Some of them are not really safe places to stop anymore. You'll notice
sometimes
kind of by some very
Right.
busy roadsides. But your dad used to take you on these trips, you and your brother, around the state?
Yes, and sometimes they weren't necessarily to a specific marker because it seemed like a lot of times Dad was taking us to places that didn't have markers, but he had a sense or he had read something and thought, this is probably about in that area. So he would pop me and my little brother into the car, and we'd head off with some beef jerky and a soda pop in the car to wherever, and to funny sounding names like Howie in the Hills and Interlaken, Christmas, Florida, and wherever. And then we'd hop out and explore. And that was just what we did. I mean, that was what we did weekend after weekend after weekend. And I think I knew that other kids my age probably weren't doing this, but this is just what we did.
Yeah.
And then Dad would get out and start talking to people and asking questions. And I remember sometimes being a little embarrassed, like, oh gosh, here's Dad again, and he's going to ask somebody, and they're not going to want to talk to us, and he's going to say he's a historian, da, 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 da. And then people would just talk, and they liked sharing the stories and the information that they had. And so, it was always kind of neat to then end up hearing the stories. I know that that's a big reason why I'm a reporter now, because I saw this over and over again.
You should walk with her in St. Augustine sometime, Ann, because
It's like
she
the
walks
parting of
down
the
the
sea.
street and sees somebody doing something. Well, tell me what you're doing. What's going on here? And she just kind of like engages with the person over there. I thought I was pretty bad at it. Oh, let me tell you.
Oh, my
This one over
goodness.
here, she really, really it just comes naturally to engage and ask questions, to learn about it. And then the other half of St. Augustine knows her. So
Yeah, I mean, she's
hey,
like
Jess, I don't know.
royalty in St.
Oh,
Augustine,
my
right?
goodness, y'all.
And recognized and very well loved for all
That's
the work that
kind.
you've done. But yeah,
I'd say that more than royalty. Just
Well,
really,
thank
you are. I hear that all the time.
Let's talk about his book. I'm getting
Okay,
embarrassed
here we
here.
go. Here we go.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's talk about the book, because you actually have a couple of books, and you've been doing these storytelling panels for a number of years now. So
Mhm.
for people who aren't familiar with them, they're almost in the kind of old Ripley's Believe It or Not style, where there's a
Right.
large picture
Mhm.
and then a couple of captions that discuss what's inside. But talk about what the focus is, how you got started making these in the first place.
Right. Uh, well, we had gone to all of these different places. I had notes about all the things. I had done research in advance. I mean, I would go to the library and I pull out books that had to do with certain aspects of Florida history, like the old missions that were here all over the place. And I'd never seen a sign for them. And where are they? We had a big atlas and gazetteer. So 97 pages of the back roads of Florida is basically what it is, very large scale maps. And then that's how we would, and then I would, with the research, I'd pinpoint down, I think that mission was right about here. And we drive up, nothing, no history about it at all. So I wanted to find a way to tell people who could care less about history. Maybe in their classes in school, that was the most boring class they ever had. How could I get that across? I grew up in Mandarin, and so a lot of times we come. Ripley's had just opened a little bit before that, I think. I liked the way in which he did single panel illustrations. He would have the image there, so you'd have that, and then his words were very short and very, very just staccato sentences about it. And then he always had a kicker at the end. Of course, he would say, then, if you can believe it or not.
Right.
And so, single panel illustrations so that somebody over a cup of coffee in the morning, reading it in the newspaper, who really had no idea and didn't particularly care, would read something and say, wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I put in there, now here's where you can go to experience it for yourself. Go find it there.
I love that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
actually
'cause it's
directing
really,
them to
yeah,
learn on their own.
because then it's not just something, oh, that was a little factoid, but then there's the potential for that, for somebody, by experiencing it, to really have it then become more meaningful and have incorporate a little bit more of delving in history or exploring things for themselves.
You remember it more
Yeah.
if you've been there.
Oh, yeah.
Even if there's nothing there to see anymore, you
Uh-huh.
remember it.
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
appreciate it in a very different way if you're talking to people that themselves remember it or are sharing stories about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this wasn't just like an idea. You actually published these in newspapers all around the state
Yep.
for a number of years.
Yeah.
And-
The biggest, I never got into the great big major papers, but my biggest one was the Ocala Star Banner, but they loved it because they had a section which was called Explore. And so then they would, that appeared every week in that kind of a weekend newspaper section. And then the other small town newspapers, particularly from the interior of the state and in the northern part of the state, that were people that loved their history and wanted to learn more, those newspapers carried it. And so in total, about 50 different publications in the 90s, and probably more than 500,000 readers in all. So it did get out there.
And Jessica, I mean, you also do your best to tell stories that are undertold, very often history stories. Very often you're the only person telling those stories.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're the first time people have ever heard of these elements of history.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Have you worked collaboratively with your dad in terms of offering him ideas that have led to illustrations?
Yes. Well, I think it's back and forth.
Yeah, it is.
You want to say, so Dad, what's your story? So Dad will ask me, okay, Jess, tell me a story. And he
Tell me
still
a
does
story.
this. Yeah.
Oh, we do that all the time.
Tell me a story, even if it's, like a weekly phone call. Tell me a story. And so, and then I'll ask him about a story. And sometimes, they're just about things going on in life. But a lot of times there are things that have kind of popped up that we find so interesting, a little nugget of history here or there. And did you know this? And so sometimes they have what I've discovered, maybe like on an archaeological dig or a story about this or that, daddle peppers and St. Augustine connected to the Menorcans. Then Dad ends up turning those into a illustration. Or Dad has let me know about something that I want to know more about. And then I find out, wow, there's a story to tell there. And so, yeah, I mean, is it collaborative? I think we're just sharing.
Yeah,
I guess
it's
that
really more
is.
organic than it is collaborative.
Yeah.
Like she edits the things and does all of this. It really is just an organic thing that happens between father and daughter
Yeah.
that both share that interest of the history. Yes, we could be delving into really boring books about that, but it's the interaction with the people
Mm-hmm.
and with the research that's there, the people that lived before. It is that interaction that is so rich, and I think that drives us both. And sometimes the stories, just people did things, took risks in order to make the world a better place, and those are the stories that I love the most. And the second book that just came out, Light One Candle, is about stories of people who chose to light one candle rather than curse the darkness, and illustrated Florida history. And those are people that, like a priest that came to Florida in 1549 to show Florida native people a more loving side of Spanish culture than what they had experienced with Hernando de Soto.
Who basically
Who
pillaged
basically
and
pillaged his way through. And so and so those native people, they didn't want to have anything to do with the Spanish as a result of that. And so he had been a part of a movement for human rights in the Spanish Catholic Church that began in the 1520s
Wow.
in Central America. So much so that they really helped the Spanish crown think through, who are these people that we're encountering here in the Americas? Are they fully human beings? And the end result of it was, through these priests that were working with them, they said, of course they are, just as much as we are. And so then the king actually created what's called the New Law in 1542, which to the conquistadors was, guys, you are not doing it the way that we need to do it if we're going to really share with them the fullness of who we are as people, which a lot of that is based in Christianity. It's based in treating people with respect, and not exploiting as, just totally just being about exploitation and pillage, but it is seeing the humanity in them, and they're becoming members of our churches. We need to see them as brothers and sisters, and at least treat them with that kind of respect
And so
and
Dad tries
dignity.
to put all that in one cell.
Yeah, I
One
did.
cell cartoon.
I mean, and so
did.
the priest in that story though it doesn't have a great ending himself. I mean,
No.
he's
Oh no, he
murdered.
was murdered by the native people, but the sea captain may not have liked priests that were trying to do things like that. I mean, it was pretty controversial, still is to this day. I work with some of those people in Argentina. That's where Jessica was born, in Buenos Aires. And but I work with some of the third world priests there. That's what they're called. They work with the poor. And then I said, did that happen here in Florida? And here is Father Pareja. He had a mission called the San Juan Mission on Fort George Island, real close to where the Kingsley Plantation is now. And it was such a major institution. It was a very large mission. It lasted for well over 100 years. that the whole St. John's River is named for that mission. The name was San Juan del Puerto, St. John of the Port.
Wow.
And that's how we got the St. John's County. That's how we got St. John's River. And he was defending the native people there, and he was empowering them to write letters in Spanish, the native people, the Temucans, to write letters in Spanish to the king when they thought that they had good grievance to bring up with what the Spanish authorities were doing. Man, it was here. And I loved it because I had seen it at work in Latin America. I had done some of it myself. And here it was taking place in this state in our history. I had no idea of that.
It's extraordinary. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Jessica Clark and Warren Clark. Warren Clark has published a number of books about Florida history. They are illustrated by him. They're written by him. And his daughter is also a storyteller in Florida here. She is an anchor and reporter at First Coast News. If you want to join our conversation, you can call us at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. Yes, Warren.
Yeah. I want to say that I was one of 3 different illustrators that created these illustrations. It was my idea. I produced them. I wrote them. I did the research on them and everything. But I asked them, okay, I want you to draw this. Here's this style of costume from that year period. Here's some photographs that might be able to help you give context to it. And I was always looking for, where's the energy in the story?
Yeah.
Where is the place where there's that energy, so that at the very end, I wanted the story to have a kick to it, that it was so that I would get that reaction of, gee, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. And it kind of a twist to the story at times. But those were really good illustrators, Richard Gamesh and Bob Lewis. And then I've done quite a few of these myself.
In terms of finding a story that is both relatable, Jessica, and, historically based, there is a lot of darker history in Florida, right? And it is difficult sometimes to balance telling the story of Florida or of St. Augustine without, telling a lot of some history people don't want told.
Indeed, yes. And, it happened. And so it should not be disregarded, and it should not be not remembered, if that makes sense. It should, there was some tough stuff. I remember feeling okay talking about it when I was talking to Father Tom in St. Augustine, and we were talking about the real atrocities that took place with the Spanish. But I was interviewing him about what happened with the missions. And so, we were kind of going into this interview, and we were saying, okay, that, the priest, and they were doing really something that they were impassioned about. But he was just fine talking about how tumultuous it was for the Spanish to come in. And for him, when I realized that he was that comfortable talking about, it was bad, he was acknowledging it while still talking about what was good. And for me, that was really eye-opening. That was probably in 2015 when we were doing stories about the 450th for St. Augustine. And it's balance. It really is. We cannot forget what happened, because it did happen, and to forget it just would not be, in my mind, acceptable.
Yeah. We've got a call from Don in North Jacksonville. Good morning, Don. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm originally from Colombia, South America, and I studied my history before coming here. I came here around high school, so I learned some high school stuff there and some high school here. And I wanted to hear a little bit about Mr. Warren's opinion on that. He said the treatment of the Spanish conquistadors on indigenous people was brutal here in Florida. And I wanted to get a contrast as how it was compared to the British colonists, the treatment of American Indians. The reason why I'm asking is because I learned in Colombia that Spanish conquistadors were more lenient in a way with indigenous people, because they were trying to teach them Christianity, get them to be Christians or Catholics, as opposed to what is seen in the, British American history with. It seems like they were not trying to convert them to Christianity. It seems like it was more like they were trying to get rid of them in a way. So I wanted to get a contrast in what is erroneous, what is accurate on that. And also another take is you see the racial makeup in Latino countries. You see a mix of Indian with white and mestizo with brown people versus what you see in the USA. So I want to hear a take on that.
Okay, that's great. And in fact, on this book, there's a whole section at the very beginning where I contrast the British colonies with the Spanish colonies, because a lot of times we as North Americans, we see through the lens of Jamestown and Plymouth Rock up in Massachusetts and all of the English people that came here. But let's take slavery for instance. Here in Florida, in the mid to late 1600s, if you could get away from the slavery in the Carolinas and make your way down here to Florida, you could be free if you would take the catechism, learn about the Christian faith through the Catholic Church, and become a parishioner, and also if you would be willing to serve on the militia here to help defend your freedom that you got here in Florida from the English that were coming down here trying to take over Florida. And so there was a whole colony or a whole town that grew just north of St. Augustine called Fort Mose. And so that way in to freedom was here. For people that were slaves that were here, there were other avenues for freedom. When you were talking about the diversity, intermarriage among races in Spanish culture here in the Americas, that's just how it worked. People loved each other, and the racial barriers didn't matter as much. At least it wasn't banned like it was in the English colonies and in the Old South. And so the other thing is, if you were a Catholic here, you had the rights to all of the sacraments. That included marriage. In the English colonies, you were really more like beasts of burden and treated that way and separated and sold out. Family members just sold off.
In the British
colonies.
Yeah.
But here that was not possible. And so families were able to keep together, even if they were slaves. There were real rights here for people that were slaves to be able to call into question or to challenge if there was real brutality that was taking place. That is not to whitewash it and say there wasn't harshness, but it was certainly a different way of being. And I love it that our original history that we have in this area with the Spanish vibrates with the same, the same vitality of the diverse and fully integrated way in which the 21st century America is becoming. And it was very much that way in Florida even before Jamestown. I hope that answers your question just a little bit, Don.
It is a real difference. And the focus on Spanish Florida is an interesting lens, as you say, because a lot of our history that we learn in the United States is often told through that lens of kind of the victors as opposed to the people that were driven out.
I think this is actually a very good origin story for what is now the United States, for our 21st century, who we are as a people, because we are more and more becoming that intermarried, interrelated group of people. I remember growing up here, my folks and other people that I knew were scared to death of that, of having intermarriage between races. Now, boy, I mean, it's happening, and it really is a very powerful thing for us to not just celebrate, but to take the full energy of a diverse community, so that gets used to create far more creatively than if we're just segregated into different groups.
What are some of the cultural influences that you think remain in St. Augustine or in Northeast Florida from that period? Are there things tangibly that you can point to and say, this is, a leftover, this is something that was bequeathed on these people that we're still doing?
You want to go with that, or do you?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is actually not Spanish. It's Minorcan. When the Minorcan people came up from New Smyrna, and they had been indentured servants there, but they escaped and came into St. Augustine and sought basically freedom, and a better life. So many of those folks came from the Greek Isles. We have Greek people all over St. Augustine still who are locals. I mean, when you say locals, I mean they go back to the 1700s from the group of Menorcans who came from New Smyrna.
And those are those very familiar Menorcan names, right? Like
Oh yeah, Pacetti and
Pelletier and
yeah,
Andreu.
yeah, and so yeah, I mean they are still very much there, making Menorcan chowder, daddle pepper, whatever you call it, anything you want to do with daddle peppers, and but so that was the first thing that comes to mind. But Dad, what else were you thinking?
Well, actually, I was thinking of them as well.
Okay.
That is a pervasive, spread out culture now all over Northeast Florida. It's not just in St. Augustine. You find people of Menorcan background, and Menorca was a Spanish island, so a large number of those people, the majority, actually had that Spanish heritage, even though at the time I think it might have been a British colony.
And so they were brought over almost under false pretenses, right? They were
Right.
brought to New
Oh yeah,
Smyrna. They were working on like an indigo plantation, I think, and
absolutely. And then they were
and then they
told,
weren't given their freedom.
correct. They were supposed to be working for so many years, and
Yeah.
then they would be let free. But that never happened. In addition, the treatment that they received while working on the plantation was just horrendous.
I mean, it's interesting when you talk about slaves, people who were enslaved in, say, South Carolina, coming to St. Augustine for freedom or something resembling it. People coming from New Smyrna up to St. Augustine for the same reason. And then St. Augustine being such a bastion in the civil rights movement, so key to ensuring freedom for, people of all races. That also is a difficult story that you've tackled in a variety of ways, though, the civil rights movement in St. Augustine.
Yeah, absolutely. Dad's second book really gets into a lot of that, and A Light One Candle, it's called.
I'm going to just hold it up here for the camera.
Oh,
so people
okay.
can-
And but in St. Augustine, the stories are rich. Now, there was a ground movement in St. Augustine before Dr. King and before SELC came through. But really, when Dr. King came in, that was when things really started to ratchet up. But so is it leftovers from colonial times? I don't know. I don't know about that.
I
But
don't know. I think that really was, particularly, it was children and youth in the black community in St. Augustine. And Dr. Haling was the one that was working with them and was an inspiration for them. And Cat Twine was another person that was one of those motivators that was there, that was like kind of like the Rosa Parks of St. Augustine.
And there's a street named after Cat Twine
I used
now.
to live on it.
Twine Street.
Twine Street. That's right.
But I think, and we were wondering. I guess I was wondering if you were asking, are there leftovers still of the colonial time period? I don't know. I definitely from the civil rights era, but that was not that long ago. I mean, there is still a rich heritage there, and a feeling of connection to that time period with the people who still live in St. Augustine.
Yeah, and I don't know if I was asking necessarily about a through line between the colonial times
Okay.
and the civil rights movement, but just sort of perhaps a happy accident that this is a place that so many people
Oh,
came
yeah.
to establish or kind of plant the flag in the name of freedom.
Yes, indeed.
Here's a pass through on it. St. Augustine is a community that absolutely loves its history and loves to tell its stories. And as we embrace the fullness of that story, then I think the pass through of that original way in which we were a community in colonial times is a story that will be told. And if it becomes an integrated part into the origin story of the United States, that is a real contribution from those times, even though there may not be that much flesh and blood. People that are remainders from that time. There is the Ponce family, and they claim heritage back to Ponce de Leon, and so I mean they're very much an important family in St. Augustine. So, but I think it's going to be in the storytelling, is where that influence comes through.
We've got an email I want to ask here. Wally says, if the human rights advocate was Bartolome de las Casas, which is, I believe, the person you were talking about, the priest, he says, didn't he suggest using Africans instead of the natives, I guess, as slaves?
Not perfect, huh? Yes.
Yeah. So,
but even okay, and that's very true. And so that does not negate the fact that treating the Native people with respect and dignity was important.
And new and different.
And new and different, and not always done by any means. And also, then the Africans that came over into Spanish slavery, it was a different kind of slavery than it was up in the English colonies, because still families could not be separated.
Yeah, that northern chattel slavery was.
And that's just one example of that.
But
Yep.
but I think it is good, and it
You
is
gotta own
right
it,
to
though.
perform acknowledge. Yeah, he wasn't perfect. I mean, what eh, eh, that is part of the history.
Mhm.
Imperfection.
Yeah, that's a good point. We also have a message from Ed on Facebook. He says the Catholic Church made it clear that both the natives and the black slaves who came later had souls and therefore were humans versus the English-based Protestant churches who denied that the native and black populations had one. And that is why there's little attempt to evangelize them that occurred by the English settlers.
Yeah, but maybe certainly that happened to a significant degree in the South. But you have to remember that it was the Protestant churches in New England, particularly, and in the North, that were passageways for the second Underground Railroad that ran north, and that they were the advocates by far for ending slavery in the United States.
Interesting. I want to talk just very briefly.
So there is that peace and justice movement that is very strong within the Protestant churches as well, even to this day.
I just want to very briefly talk the Light One Candle, this most recent booklet. It is a great story of people who lived, with a positive example, regardless of what was happening around them. Also imperfect in their own ways,
Yes.
Jessica. But this is a book that kids and adults can both really appreciate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love the pictures. The pictures are great for kids, right?
It's got
Colorful.
Ray Charles on the cover. That was the one that I just held up a minute ago. But there are so many moments in history about the guy that invented air conditioning. The rabbis that were arrested when they were doing the largest civil rights demonstration in St. Augustine and support of Martin Luther King.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, it is good for kids and it's good for adults. And I guess kind of that goes back to you and me, Dad, going around with my brother. And it was great for kids. We didn't get all the intellectual understanding that Dad was getting along the road as we were traveling, but Dad certainly got it. And for the kids, it was great to go along and learn a little bit too.
I had to distill the words on these. You've got about 50 to 70 words that you can put in a single panel. That's max.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. I had to rewrite and rewrite. It's called compacted writing. And but I wanted it to be readable within 45 seconds or less, so that it really is a sound bite into that history. So it doesn't have to be somebody who's an historian that's going to take this and read it. Adults that are interested, children that are interested as well.
Well, Dr. Warren Clark, Jessica Clark, our local historians, great ways of telling stories. We appreciate both of you. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. You've elevated me to historian.
That's right.
Wow.
Up next, we're going to be unpacking the intriguing artifacts donated for the Jacksonville History Center archives, which collects donated artifacts that document the city's history. Here to tell us about this year's booty is Emily Cottrell, archivist at the Jacksonville History Center. Hey, Emily.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. We're also joined by Erin Mustard, the center's assistant archivist. Hey, Erin.
Hello.
So tell us about this collection. First of all, who donates? What are the rules? What are you looking for?
Well, we get a lot of donations from people local, also people that are not local or once were local. Actually, I think a few weeks ago we found someone from Maryland. She shipped us a scrapbook of someone who worked at Furchgut's in the 50s, and it was she had her her train tickets. She had documents from when she worked there. She had photographs.
What is it, a store? Or?
Furchgut's was a department store that was downtown in the 30s.
Yep. So Furchgut's is one of the really old department stores that were very active downtown. They were kind of competitors with Cohen Brothers. Cohen's, you'll know, because the current City Hall building was formerly a Current Brothers department store. That's where it originated from. But Furchgut's was kind of like the Walmart or Target of like the 30s, 40s, 50s.
Interesting. Yeah. And so you collect stuff. Are there certain rules that guidelines that you give people? I mean, I'm just thinking everybody's got like a garage full of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And boy,
Yes.
would they like to put it somewhere,
Yes.
and bequeath it to somebody that might appreciate it. So, what volume are you getting? What are the guidelines in terms of what you'll accept and what you're really interested in?
Yeah, so this year in 2024, we received over 3 dozen donations of items, and that doesn't mean just one item. It's like a collection of items from individual people. We also get some things from organizations who are like, this doesn't work for us, here it works for you. What we really look for are unique pieces of history. So maybe not something that's mass produced like a newspaper, unless it's a really rare edition, or a magazine, but like photos of your family members somewhere, or personal letters, diaries, things that are really like one of a kind that you wouldn't find anywhere else. Those are the pieces of history that really historians and researchers are looking for, because it's not something that can be found necessarily online in an online, repository somewhere. It's something that like is going to shed the kind of human aspects of history, not just dates and facts.
Interesting. And so one of the things you collected this year was a collection from a local former DJ at WAPE, which was a kind of legendary radio station because of its reach. In its early days, it was an AM station that went from DC to Key West.
Yeah.
Still exists on the FM dial.
Yeah. So we were contacted by Honest John Faree. He doesn't live locally anymore.
Honest John was his DJ name.
Yep. And he was a DJ from in the 60s and 70s. And actually, it was his wife who collected all of the things. He was just kind of doing his DJ thing, and so his wife actually went and collected these things, and she recently passed away, and he wanted to donate them. So he's been sending us stuff as he's found them. We've got some name tags. We've got some surveys. I think he just sent us 2 sweatshirts that they wore in this kind of iconic picture. I think they were playing a basketball game, but they also sent us a signed Beatles. It's not a record. It's more like
It's a plaque.
Yeah.
So the Beatles, they came to Jacksonville obviously to play the Gator Bowl, I believe. Yes, but WAPE actually hosted them on like an on-air concert that they used to have. And for that, they had this plaque made that all the Beatles signed and was given to WAPE from the Beatles and from the company, because it was like a picture of the Beatles and all their signatures, and it was a thank you for like having them on air in this concert. It was a cheap way to have a lot of musicians on air instead of having a concert where people have to go and pay and see it. But for this collection, it's great because he sent us paper materials, photographs, but he also sent us objects. So one of the things was a promotional transistor radio that they used to like give out for free at events. So, it's an easy way to up your, your listener count.
And it actually has, I just noticed this yesterday, it actually has the 690 AM listed on it. And it mentions
that was the WAPE's original
and it
location.
says something like 50, I'm not too versed on radio, but 50,000 watts, and that happened I think in 1958. They received this extra boost so that they could go on for longer, they could have longer shows. And it's like on the transistor radio it says like 690 AM, 50,000 watts.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
Yeah, it was the size of that reach, I think, that really made them such a legend, and part of the reason that they're still around today, I guess. So explain to me, first of all, what is the difference between the Historical Society and the History Center? What's the relationship there?
Yeah, so we are actually the same entity. So the Jacksonville Historical Society was founded in 1929, so a few years ago. And we were this historical society, and that's still our legal name, but we've kind of moved and migrated to being identified as the History Center because it's more inclusive. We're in the process of developing a museum and a larger archive space, and so we have a few properties that we'll encompass. And we're really just trying to move away from the kind of exclusivity that the word society sometimes is linked to. We want to be more inclusive. We want to be more welcoming. We want people to feel more comfortable coming to us. And, historically, societies tend to seem like kind of, only for certain rich people, or, like seems like you have to like be part of a specific group to join. And we're open to everyone. We want to have everyone come in and be able to see their history represented and be able to access the things that we have in our collections.
I mean, so lest you get flooded with a bunch of people bringing in old family albums, can you give us some specific rules of thumb that perhaps would let people know whether that you would even be interested in what they have?
So we are actually in the process of developing kind of a workshop that we're going to hold at Old St. Andrews to kind of give people an idea how to preserve their things at home, whether they want to get them prepared for a bigger donation or they just want to take care of them in their home. I think probably the biggest thing is don't put your pictures in the scrapbooks, or not the scrapbooks, but the photo albums with sticky stuff on the back. That is the biggest, that's one of the biggest frustrations, is getting that stuff off, because it can damage the back of the picture. So just putting them in plastic is usually the best thing. But if they wanted to donate, the best thing to do is really to, I would say, have them, I guess, organized in some kind of way, whether that's by, the type of material.
I mean, do
that
they
it
have to
is.
make an appointment? Do they just drop it off on your doorstep?
So we actually just, to kind of manage our donation process, we have an online form now that people can go and fill out information. These are questions that we would ask if they came in or if they called. What kind of materials do you have? How many do you have? Is there information written on them? Does it identify people or places or events, or something that to be true, like this is your grandmother, but that's not written on there. So we kind of get a sense of that. We also want to know the condition of items when they come in. Have they been in your garage, or have they been in plastic sheeting and very nicely organized in a climate controlled, humidity controlled room, and so that gives us a sense that there's some ways to look at. We give some options for ways that they can talk about the condition, and then I think that's
Yeah,
pretty
and
much it.
a lot of times what we're really looking for is, while we love looking at people's family photos, we're really looking for things that would resonate with other members of the community as well. So if you have a family scrapbook, and it's just your family at your family home, maybe you keep that, keep it for your children, for your grandchildren. But if you have letters from your grandmother to a former mayor, or, was at this major concert that happened here, or went to this grand opening of a theater, those are things that other people would recognize and identify with. Those are the types of things that we kind of are preferring and we're looking at. Now, if you're from a major family that a street in Jacksonville's named after, maybe, reach out to us anyway about those family photos. But we're really looking for pieces of history that it's not just one person who's going to be able to identify it. It's going to tell a bigger story and be able to fall into the bigger story of the history of the city.
I would guess there's some communities of people, though, particularly if they're sort of undertold stories, where those family albums would be invaluable just in terms of piecing together a story that maybe we don't have a lot of records on.
Absolutely, and that was actually one of the things that Emily mentioned in the newsletter from our from recently, was the papers of a man named Hugh McGlodden, and he was a freed Black man living in Maryland. This family had we got this collection of family papers that had they would have connections in Jacksonville, but also in Maryland, and he was this man who was a lawyer, Thomas Hodson, was basically the executor and the person who was responsible for all of Hugh McGlodden's kind of, I guess
activities
he was,
and records.
yeah, he was his sort of his lawyer, but not in a sense of going to a court and having to, to do anything. But he was involved. We don't know how they were connected, but they were. He was responsible for kind of taking care of his assets, showing us. So we have an idea of who this man was and what a freed Black man might have lived like in that time period.
Well, it's amazing stuff. Thanks for sharing some of the archive with us, and we hope to have you back soon. Emily Cottrell, Erin Mustard, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, up next, beer, networking, and a podcast advice are all on tap at the second annual Jax Podathon.
Rate or visit us at wjct.org/radio.
Do you ever Google your medical symptoms, give yourself a scary diagnosis, and then start to panic? On the next Fresh Air, we talk with Caroline Crampton, author of a new book about hypochondria and illness anxiety. She became hypervigilant after surviving cancer and constantly checking herself for signs of recurrence. Her new book is A Body Made of Glass. Join us
today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
The holiday season is here, and with it, fevers, chills, coughs, and sneezes.
Respiratory illnesses peak in December through February, but less than half of American adults are up to date on their vaccinations against RSV, coronavirus, and the flu. Our series In Good Health returns to discuss the public health challenge of vaccine hesitancy. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, from professional athletes to investigative reporters, it seems like everybody has a podcast these days. Is there still room to jump in the pool? Here to tell us about the local podcasting community are Bader Milligan and Blythe Broomleaf, co-founders of Jax Podcasters United. Welcome.
Hey, good morning, Ann. Good morning,
Thank you
Jacksonville.
so much. Thanks for being here. So tell us, Bader, at what point is the podcast market saturated?
You could probably make an argument a couple years ago, but you know what? I think that's the beauty of podcasting is that it kind of democratized, if I said that all wrong, the ability of spoken word and having your own kind of show. So, I'm here for it.
Yeah, everybody, I guess, has an opportunity to do it. The technology isn't necessarily
Agreed.
out of the reach of a lot of people. So what does Podcasters United do for people who are trying to find their voice or trying to get something started?
So we really appeal to a broad dynamic of podcasters, whether you're entry level or whether you have the high expertise that you've been doing it for years. The overwhelming majority of podcasters quit after 10 episodes. It's something like 90% of all podcasters quit before they ever make it to 10 episodes. And so while there are a lot of podcasts out there, we try to help the people that are trying to get started and excel to the next level. And so we have a lot of businesses here in the North Florida area that cater to specifically podcasting, and also a lot of workers that are working in the gig economy that can help facilitate some of those things that, when you start podcasting, you might not be a fan of.
Yeah. And we firmly
Like editing or
Yes.
sound control. Yeah.
all the nitty gritty hard stuff, really. But we firmly believe in collaboration and community over competition. So our goal is to make Jacksonville a hub and a destination for podcasters because, we believe why not Jax? There's already a community of great podcasters, entrepreneurs, and businesses like Blythe was saying.
Why is it that so many stop before they get very far?
It's a lot of the challenges that we've kind of already discussed. So it's the editing, it's the production quality. Do I need to move to video or not? And then also with balancing it with a full-time job. And so when you are starting off with podcasting, it's very difficult to gain that traction quickly because of the discoverability or the lack thereof within podcasting. And so they get frustrated. They only have a handful of listeners and they figure, well, why am I doing all of this? And that's why we have the JPU, is that we want to be that voice for you, that flashlight in the dark for these folks that are getting frustrated but want to move to the next level, and they want to know, are they alone or are other people experiencing the same thing?
Do you think that perhaps some people just also don't realize their capacity to produce or that the subject that they're interested in talking about maybe doesn't have
It's
just
as
that much
nuanced.
runway?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about the oversaturation. I think, podcasting has, the floodgates have kind of opened up in the last couple of years. And I think especially of COVID, with a lot more people being at home and doing more things like streaming and being more involved with online communities, I think a lot of folks had seen how many podcasts were popping up and maybe discounted the level of work that goes into, especially as a hobbyist, or if you don't have a giant network or, full-time producers and whatnot, you really start. I think that sometimes new podcasters kind of undervalue or underestimate just how much work goes into everything behind the scenes that doesn't involve being in front of the mic.
Yeah. I mean, I can attest to that. We've been working on a podcast project here, and it is enormously time consuming. It really does take a lot of work and detail, focus to do it. But is there, I find it as a podcast fan that it's really hard to sort of sift through the chaff, as it were, because there's subjects that interest me, but I still don't like the way that the podcast is done. Or maybe the podcast has really low production values, but I really want to know what they're talking about. But there's so many. I just curious if you have any tips for how you access the stuff you want in a way that you're not listening to a bunch of stuff you don't care about.
Well, the majority of podcasts you hear about through word of mouth. And so that's the most challenging piece to the puzzle. But we found that if we recommend the discoverability platform, so social media, email marketing, developing those relationships with your audience from the jump, so then that way you have direct access to them, and then exploring and expanding into worlds of like YouTube, for example, because YouTube is kind of the bane of existence for a lot of podcasters. They think, oh, I have to do video now too, but YouTube's algorithm and their discoverability for your show is so much more powerful. So even if you just have your cell phone standing up and filming you while you're doing the recording, that can mean more visitors can discover your show on a variety of platforms and then follow you on the podcast platform.
So there is an event though that's coming up next Wednesday, this Podathon. So what is the goal of it? Who's invited, and what's it all about?
So everyone, so we like to say that whether you are a podcaster that's been doing it for a long time or an aspiring podcaster dreams of starting your own show, you're all invited, because we have resources and tools there that are valuable for all skill levels. So our Podathon it's going to be our second annual event today, or next Wednesday. It's the biggest free event that the Jax Podcasters United group throws, and it's modeled after like the traditional radiothon. So in this instance, it's our opportunity to not only empower local podcasters and podcasters in our community, but also a chance for us to do some good by raising money for, local charity. In this case, that we're supporting Feeding Northeast Florida.
All right. You can find more info at jaxpodcastersunited.com. Thanks for being here, both of you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. That's our program. Join us tomorrow when our panel of media experts discusses everything.
Provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Congaree & Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpen.com.